The cold bit through Ophelia Grace's thin cotton dress like wolves, tearing at wounded prey, and she knew with terrible certainty that she might die tonight on her 20th birthday. She stumbled through the darkness of the Arizona high country, her bare feet bleeding on the frozen ground, each breath a knife of ice in her lungs, as the first frost of November 1883 transformed the world into something merciless and strange. Behind her, the ranch house glowed warm with lamplight, the windows like mocking eyes that watched her exile, and she could still hear her stepmother's voice echoing in her mind, cold as the night itself. "Your father is dead, girl, and you have no place here anymore." The words had come just hours after they'd lowered her father into the ground, his coffin disappearing into the earth, while Ophelia stood silent and hollow, grief sitting in her chest like a stone. Thomas Grace had been a good man, a fair rancher who'd built something decent in the high desert country near Prescott, where the elevation brought pine trees and seasons unlike the brutal flatlands below. He'd married Catherine Winters 3 years ago, a widow from California with calculating green eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Ophelia had tried to be kind, tried to accept this woman who'd invaded their home, but Catherine had looked at her with something between contempt and competition, as though they were rivals rather than family. Now, with Thomas cold in the ground, Catherine had wasted no time. While neighbors still lingered after the burial, eating the food Ophelia had prepared with shaking hands, Catherine had pulled her aside. "Pack your things and leave before nightfall," she'd said simply. "This ranch belongs to me now. I have the marriage papers, and you're nothing but a burden I won't carry." "This is my home," Ophelia had whispered, shock making her stupid and slow. "I was born here. My mother is buried on that hill." "Your mother is dust. Your father is joining her, and I suggest you find somewhere else before I have the sheriff remove you." Catherine's face had been stone. "Unless you want to stay as hired help, sleeping in the bunkhouse with the men. I'm sure they'd appreciate the company." The implication had been clear and disgusting, and Ophelia had recoiled. She'd gone to her room trying to think, trying to plan, but shock and grief had paralyzed her. She'd sat on her narrow bed, staring at the walls she'd known her entire life, unable to believe this was happening. Her father had been healthy just a week ago, laughing at dinner, discussing the coming winter. Then he'd complained of chest pains, collapsed in the barn, and within a day he was gone. The doctor said it was his heart, sudden and complete. Nothing anyone could have done. Now Ophelia wondered if Catherine had poisoned him, though she had no proof, just a terrible suspicion that coiled in her gut like a snake. But what could she do? She was a woman alone with no money, no family, no power. The law wouldn't listen to the unfounded accusations of a grieving daughter against a respectable widow. She'd lingered too long in her room, paralyzed by disbelief and sorrow, and when she'd finally emerged with a small bag of belongings, the sun had already set. Catherine had been waiting in the parlor with 2 of the ranch hands, men Ophelia didn't recognize, drifters her stepmother must have hired recently. "Too late," Catherine had said with satisfaction. "I told you before nightfall. These men will see you off the property now." "But it's freezing," Ophelia had protested, terror finally breaking through her shock. "The first frost came today." "I need time to find somewhere to go. Please, just let me stay in the barn tonight, and I'll leave at first light." "You'll leave now." Catherine had nodded to the men, and they'd grabbed Ophelia's arms with rough hands, dragging her toward the door even as she struggled. They'd thrown her into the yard, tossed her bag after her, and one of them had laughed as she'd fallen to the frozen ground. The door had slammed, the lock had clicked, and Ophelia had been alone in the dark with winter's first cruel breath wrapping around her. She'd tried to go to the barn, but the men had followed, making sure she left the property entirely. They'd herded her down the long drive to the road, their horses pushing her forward whenever she tried to stop. Only when she'd reached the fence line did they turn back, satisfied she was truly exiled. Ophelia had stood at the gate, shivering already, watching the only home she'd ever known disappear into the darkness behind her. Now she walked because standing still meant death. The Arizona high country wasn't like the desert below. Here, at over 5,000 feet, winter came hard, and the first frost could kill as surely as a bullet. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thin shawl offering almost no protection. Her funeral dress, the black cotton she'd worn to bury her father, was meant for indoor mourning, not wilderness survival. She had no coat, no gloves, no proper shoes. Everything she owned was in the house, and Catherine had made sure she left with nothing. The road stretched empty in both directions, pale in the starlight. Prescott was 10 miles south, but Ophelia knew she'd never make it that far in the cold. Already her feet were going numb, and her hands ached with a deep, burning pain that she knew was the first stage of frostbite. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue, tasting copper. She needed shelter, fire, help, or she would die on this road, becoming just another forgotten tragedy of the Arizona wilderness. She stumbled forward, not even sure which direction she was moving anymore, just knowing that walking was life and stopping was death. Her mind began to fog, thoughts scattering like startled birds. She thought of her mother, dead these 10 years from a fever that took her quickly and brutally. She thought of her father, his kind eyes and work-roughened hands, the way he'd taught her to ride and rope and manage a ranch. She thought of all the futures she'd imagined, all the hopes that now lay as frozen as the ground beneath her bleeding feet. Time lost meaning. She might have walked for an hour or 3, she couldn't tell. The world narrowed to the next step, and the next, and the next. She didn't realize she'd left the road until she stumbled into a fence post, the rough wood scraping her shoulder. She followed the fence line because it was there, because it suggested human presence, because she had no other plan. The gate appeared like a miracle, solid wood between stone pillars, and beyond it a drive leading to distant buildings silhouetted against the stars. Ophelia tried to open the gate, but her hands wouldn't work properly, her fingers stiff and clumsy. She rattled the wood, making noise, hoping someone would hear, but her strength was failing. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed against the gate, sliding to the frozen ground, pulling her knees to her chest in a futile attempt at warmth. This is where I die, she thought with strange clarity. On someone's doorstep, like a stray dog. The cold was almost comfortable now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. She was supposed to feel cold before she froze, not warm. But the warmth was spreading through her limbs, making her want to sleep, to rest, to let go. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching from the other side of the gate, didn't register the sounds of concern until the gate swung open and she fell backward into empty air. Strong hands caught her, and a voice, deep and alarmed, cut through the fog in her mind. Jesus Christ, you're frozen solid. Can you hear me? Miss, can you hear me? Ophelia tried to answer, but her jaw wouldn't work. She managed a small sound, barely a whimper, and felt herself being lifted. The world spun, and then there was movement. The sensation of being carried. Voices calling out in the distance. Pa, get the house warm. I've got someone half dead at the gate. More movement, more voices, and then blessed warmth, so sudden and intense it hurt. Ophelia cried out as pain exploded through her frozen limbs, the burning agony of blood returning to damaged tissue. She was on a floor, on blankets, by a fire that roared with new life as someone fed it logs. Don't warm her too fast, an older voice said urgently. It'll kill her as sure as the cold. Gradual, son, gradual. Her feet are bleeding. She's got no proper clothes, nothing. The first voice again, young and male and full of barely controlled panic. Who would put someone out on a night like this? Don't know, but we'll find out. Get those wet things off her and wrap her in dry blankets. I'll make hot broth. Move, boy. Ophelia felt hands on her, gentle but efficient, removing her damp shawl and dress. She should have been mortified, but she was beyond caring, beyond anything but the desperate need for warmth, and the excruciating pain of returning sensation. A thick flannel nightshirt replaced her dress and dry wool blankets cocooned her. Someone rubbed her hands carefully and feet, working blood back into frozen flesh. "Stay with us," the young voice urged. "You're safe now. You're going to be all right. Just stay with us." Ophelia forced her eyes open and found herself looking into the most extraordinary face she'd ever seen. The man kneeling beside her was perhaps 25, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes the color of strong coffee, warm and intent as they studied her with fierce concern. His face was all sharp angles and tanned skin, handsome in the way of men who lived hard lives outdoors, and there was something in his expression, a fundamental decency that made her want to trust him. "That's it," he said softly, seeing her awareness return. "You're at the Dalton Ranch. You're safe. I'm Vincent Dalton. Can you tell me your name?" "Ophelia," she managed through chattering teeth. "Ophelia Grace." "Grace? From the ranch north of here?" An older man appeared, white-haired and weathered, his face creased with concern. "Thomas Grace's daughter?" She nodded, and tears began to fall hot on her frozen cheeks. "He died 2 days ago. His heart. We buried him today, and she locked me out. Catherine, my stepmother, she said the ranch was hers and I had to leave, and I tried, but it was dark and so cold, and I didn't know where to go." Vincent's face darkened with anger. "She threw you out on the first frost? After a burial? What kind of monster?" "Easy, son," the older man, clearly Vincent's father, interrupted. "The girl's in no state for interrogation. Let's get her warm and fed, then we'll sort the rest." He handed Vincent a cup of steaming broth. "Get this into her. Slow sips." Vincent helped Ophelia sit up, supporting her with one arm while holding the cup to her lips with the other. The broth was salty and rich, warming her from the inside, and she drank it gratefully, feeling strength seep back into her body with each swallow. The pain in her hands and feet was subsiding to a dull throb, and her mind was clearing, shock receding enough for reality to crash back in with terrible force. She was alive, but she'd lost everything: her home, her father, her entire life, all ripped away in a single day. She had nothing but the nightshirt someone had dressed her in and the blankets wrapped around her. She was completely dependent on the kindness of strangers, and she didn't even know if she had any right to that kindness. "I'm sorry," she whispered when the cup was empty. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just walking, trying to find shelter, and I saw your gate. I'll leave in the morning. I won't be a burden." "You'll do no such thing," Vincent's father said firmly. "I'm Walter Dalton, and you'll stay here as long as you need. No one gets turned away from this house, especially not a neighbor in need. Your father was a good man, Miss Grace. The least we can do is help his daughter." "Did you know him?" Ophelia asked, hope flickering. "Not well, but I knew of him. Heard he ran an honest operation, treated his people fair. I'm sorry for your loss." Walter's expression was kind. "But right now you need rest. Vincent, take her to Sarah's old room. It's warm and the bed's made up. Miss Grace, you sleep as long as you need. We'll talk more when you're recovered." Vincent helped her stand, keeping one arm around her waist when she swayed, her damaged feet protesting any weight. Without a word, he simply swept her back into his arms, carrying her as though she weighed nothing. Ophelia was too tired to protest, too grateful for the care. She let her head rest against his shoulder as he carried her through the house, up a narrow staircase to a small room that was indeed warm and welcoming. He set her gently on the bed, pulling quilts up to her chin. "Sarah was my sister," he said quietly. "She married a rancher in New Mexico 5 years back. This was her room growing up, and it's yours now for as long as you need it." "Thank you," Ophelia whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay anything, just rest." Vincent hesitated at the door, his expression troubled. "That woman, your stepmother, she had no right to throw you out like that. What she did was cruel and probably illegal. My father knows the law and will look into it. But tomorrow, Tonight you're safe, and that's what matters." He left, closing the door softly, and Ophelia was alone in the warmth and quiet. She should have felt relief, gratitude, hope. Instead, she felt hollowed out, scraped clean by loss. She curled on her side, pulling the quilts close, and let herself cry, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her father, for her lost home, for the terror of the cold night and the humiliation of her exile. She cried until exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a sleep so deep it was like falling into a well. She woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from below. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory returned, cold and hard, and she lay still, taking inventory. Her feet ached, but the pain was manageable. Her hands were stiff but functional. She was alive, which was more than she'd expected last night. A soft knock on the door made her sit up. "Come in," she called, her voice rough from crying. Vincent entered carrying a tray. "Morning. Pa thought you might want breakfast up here before facing the world." He set the tray on the bedside table. "Eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, and strong black coffee. How are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you." Ophelia pulled the quilts around her shoulders, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed nightshirt. "I owe you my life, Mr. Dalton." "Vincent, please. And you don't owe me anything." He settled into a chair by the window, giving her space. "Pa and I talked this morning. We rode over to your stepmother's place before dawn." Ophelia's heart sank. "What did she say?" "She said you were a hysterical girl who ran off after the funeral, ungrateful for all her care. Said she tried to stop you, but you wouldn't listen." Vincent's jaw tightened. "She's a convincing liar, I'll give her that. Had tears in her eyes and everything, but her story doesn't match your condition. You were half frozen and barefoot. If you'd run off, you'd have taken proper clothes." "She's going to get away with it, isn't she?" Ophelia said bitterly. "She has the ranch, the papers, respectability. Who's going to believe me?" "I believe you." Vincent met her eyes steadily. "And so does my father. The question is what you want to do about it." Ophelia picked at the breakfast, her appetite gone despite the food's appeal. "What can I do? I have no money, no lawyer, no proof she did anything wrong. She married my father legally, and as his widow she inherits. Even if I could prove she threw me out, what then? I can't force her to let me back. You could challenge the inheritance. You're his daughter, his blood. A good lawyer might argue you have rights to at least part of the estate." "With what money would I hire this good lawyer?" Ophelia shook her head. "I appreciate your kindness, Vincent, truly. But I'm being realistic. Catherine won, and I lost. Now I need to figure out how to survive." "You can stay here," Vincent said immediately. "We've got room, and we could use help around the house. Pa and I aren't much for cooking or cleaning, and the place has gotten rough since Sarah left. It wouldn't be charity. You'd be earning your keep." The offer was tempting, almost painfully so. But Ophelia had pride, battered as it was. "I don't want to be a burden or a charity case. If I stay, it has to be as an employee, properly. Room and board plus wages." Vincent grinned, and it transformed his serious face into something boyish and charming. "Pa said you'd say that. He said Thomas Grace raised a girl with spine. All right, Miss Grace, you're hired, room, board, and fair wages for housekeeping and cooking. We'll draw up proper papers if it makes you feel better." "It would," Ophelia admitted. "Thank you. I'll start today." "You'll start when you're healed," Vincent corrected. "Your feet need another day at least. Doctor's coming this afternoon to check you over, make sure there's no permanent damage." The doctor, an old Prescott physician named Harrison, was thorough and kind. He examined Ophelia's feet and hands, applied salve to the worst blisters, and pronounced her lucky. "Another hour in that cold, and you'd have lost toes, maybe more," he said bluntly. "As it is, you'll heal up fine. Keep off your feet for a few days, keep the wounds clean, and you'll be good as new." Walter paid the doctor from his own pocket, waving off Ophelia's protests. Consider it part of your employment package, he said with a smile. Can't have our new housekeeper unable to walk, can we? So Ophelia stayed in Sarah's room for 3 more days, resting and healing, taking her meals upstairs and trying not to feel like a burden. Vincent brought her books from the small ranch library, and they discovered a shared love of novels. He'd sit in the chair by the window in the evenings, reading aloud while she mended clothes she'd found in Sarah's old trunk, garments left behind that fit well enough with minor alterations. She learned about the Daltons during those quiet evenings. Walter's wife, Vincent's mother, had died in childbirth when Vincent was 5 and Sarah just 2. Walter had raised them alone, refusing to remarry, pouring all his love into his children and his ranch. The Dalton spread wasn't large, maybe 500 acres of high country grazing land, but it was well managed and profitable. They ran cattle and horses, supplying ranches throughout the territory. Vincent was the one who'd wanted to stay. Sarah had married at 18, eager to start her own family. Walter had wanted Vincent to go to college, maybe become a lawyer or doctor, but Vincent loved the land. He'd stayed, learning everything his father could teach him, and now at 25 he ran most of the daily operations while Walter handled the business side. Don't you ever want to leave? Ophelia asked one evening. See the world, have adventures? Vincent had considered the question seriously. I've been to San Francisco, Denver, even New York once. Cities are interesting for about a week, then I miss the sky, the silence, the horses. This is my world and I'm content in it. He'd glanced at her. What about you? Did you want to leave your father's ranch? I never really thought about it, Ophelia had admitted. The ranch was my whole life. I knew every inch of it, every animal, every season. I thought I'd live there forever, maybe marry someone local, raise children in the house where I grew up. She'd paused, grief tightening her throat. Now that's gone, and I don't know what I want anymore, just to survive, I suppose, to build something new. You'll do more than survive, Vincent had said with quiet conviction. You're strong, Ophelia. Stronger than you know. On the 4th day, Ophelia insisted on getting up. Her feet were healed enough to bear weight, and she was going crazy, confined to one room. She dressed in Sarah's old clothes, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, and made her way carefully downstairs. The house needed her attention. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the sink, and the floors were tracked with mud and worse. She set to work with a will, grateful to have purpose. She swept and scrubbed, washed and organized, bringing order to chaos. The physical labor felt good, grounding, and by the time Vincent came in for lunch, the kitchen gleamed. He stopped in the doorway, staring. I'd forgotten the table was actually brown, thought it was gray. It's oak under all that grime, Ophelia said, ladling stew into bowls. Sit, eat. The stew was simple, beef and vegetables in rich broth, but both men ate like she'd served a feast. Lord, I missed real cooking, Walter said, sopping up broth with fresh bread. Vincent, did you know bread was supposed to be soft inside? I had a vague memory, Vincent said solemnly, but his eyes danced with humor. Miss Grace, you're going to spoil us. That's the idea, Ophelia said. Spoiled employers are less likely to fire an employee. She fell into a routine over the following weeks. She ran the house, cooked the meals, managed the small vegetable garden that had gone to seed, and slowly brought comfort and order to the Dalton home. In return, she had safety, stability, and a place in the world again. It wasn't her father's ranch, but it was something, and she was grateful. She was also, though she tried not to admit it, increasingly aware of Vincent. He was unfailingly kind, treating her with respect and gentle humor. He never mentioned her vulnerable state when she'd arrived, never made her feel like a charity case or someone lesser. He helped with dishes after dinner, talking easily about his day, asking about hers. He fixed things around the house without being asked, noticing a sticking door or loose board and repairing it quietly. He was also, Ophelia couldn't help but notice, extraordinarily handsome. She'd see him working with the horses, his shirt sleeves rolled up, muscles moving under tanned skin, and her mouth would go dry. She'd watch him at dinner, the lamplight catching in his dark hair, his strong hand steady on his fork, and her heart would skip. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more, but she was lying and she knew it. Thanksgiving came, cold and clear. Ophelia cooked a feast, turkey and all the trimmings, determined to show her appreciation. The three of them ate together at the clean table, and Walter raised his glass. "To family," he said simply. "Blood or chosen, it's the people at your table that matter." Ophelia's eyes burned with grateful tears. "To family," she echoed. Vincent's eyes met hers across the table, warm and intent, and something passed between them, a connection that made Ophelia's breath catch. She looked away quickly, her heart pounding, trying to ignore the heat in her cheeks. After dinner, Walter announced he was turning in early, leaving Vincent and Ophelia to clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, washing and drying dishes until Vincent spoke. "There's a dance in Prescott next Saturday, community thing, happens every month. Would you want to go?" Ophelia's hands stilled in the soapy water. "As your employee or as something else?" Vincent set down his drying towel, turning to face her fully. "As something else. As a woman I admire. As someone I'd like to know better, outside of this house." He paused. "If you're interested." Ophelia's heart was a wild thing in her chest. She should say no. She was his employee, living under his roof, dependent on his charity. Getting involved would be messy and complicated and possibly disastrous. But when she looked at him, at his honest eyes and hopeful expression, she couldn't make herself refuse. "I'd like that," she said softly. "But Vincent, I need to be honest. I have nothing. No money, no prospects, no future beyond what I can work for. If you're looking for a proper courtship with a proper woman, I'm not the right choice." "You're the only choice I'm interested in," Vincent said, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. "I don't care about money or prospects, Ophelia. I care that you're brave and kind and strong. I care that you make me want to come inside at the end of the day instead of avoiding the house. I care that when I found you at the gate, frozen and broken, you still had the will to survive. That's the woman I want to know better." Ophelia turned back to the dishes, afraid if she kept looking at him she'd do something reckless like kiss him. "Then yes, I'll go to the dance with you." Saturday arrived bright and cold. Ophelia had nothing appropriate to wear, but Sarah's old trunk yielded a dark green dress that fit almost perfectly after some alterations. She pinned up her auburn hair, wishing she had proper combs or ribbons, but making do with what was available. When she came downstairs, Vincent was waiting in the parlor in his best suit, and his expression when he saw her made all her insecurities disappear. "You're beautiful," he said simply. The dance was held in Prescott's Community Hall, a large wooden building packed with people seeking entertainment and warmth. A small band played fiddle and guitar, and the floor was crowded with dancing couples. Vincent proved to be a good dancer, confident and smooth, leading her through waltzes and reels with easy grace. Ophelia was conscious of eyes on them, of whispers behind hands. News of her father's death and her mysterious disappearance had clearly spread, and her reappearance with Vincent Dalton was causing speculation. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the music and the pleasure of Vincent's hand at her waist. Between dances, they got punch and stood at the edge of the hall watching the swirl of people. That's when Catherine appeared. Ophelia saw her stepmother across the room and froze. Catherine wore expensive black silk, the prosperous widow in mourning, and she was speaking to a group of well-dressed men and women holding court. As if sensing Ophelia's stare, Catherine turned, and their eyes met across the crowded hall. Catherine's expression went from surprise to rage to calculation in seconds. She said something to her companions and began making her way toward Ophelia and Vincent, her face arranging itself into lines of concern. "Ophelia!" she called, loud enough to draw attention. "Oh, my dear girl, thank God, I've been so worried." People turned to watch. Vincent stepped slightly in front of Ophelia, protective, but Ophelia touched his arm. It's all right, she murmured. Let her play her game. Catherine reached them, hands outstretched as if for an embrace. Ophelia didn't move, and Catherine dropped her hands, her mouth trembling. Where have you been? You ran off after the funeral, and I've been frantic. I sent men to search for you, asked everyone in town. I thought you might have done something terrible in your grief. You locked me out, Ophelia said quietly, but her voice carried. You told me the ranch was yours and I had to leave. You had your men throw me off the property in the dark during the first frost with nothing but the dress I was wearing. Catherine's eyes widened, shock and hurt playing across her face with the skill of an actress. That's not true, Ophelia. I know you're grieving, but these delusions— They're not delusions, Vincent interrupted, his voice hard. I found her collapsed at my gate, half frozen and bleeding. Another hour and she'd have been dead. That's not the result of a girl running off in grief. That's attempted murder. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Catherine's face paled, then flushed with anger. How dare you! I loved Thomas Grace, and I've done nothing but try to care for his daughter. If she ran off and nearly died, that's her own foolishness, not my fault. Then why did she have no coat, no shoes, no supplies? Vincent pressed. Why did she leave on the night of a first frost instead of waiting for morning? Why would she run away from the only home she's ever known unless she was forced? I don't have to explain myself to you, Rory, Catherine snapped. Ophelia is clearly unwell, and as her stepmother, I'm responsible for her care. She should come home with me now. I'm not going anywhere with you, Ophelia said, finding her voice and her courage. You wanted me gone, and I'm gone. I have a new home now and a job, and people who actually care whether I live or die. You can keep the ranch. I don't want anything from you except to be left alone. The ranch is legally mine, Catherine said, her mask slipping to show the cold calculation beneath. Your father left everything to me. You have no claim. Then we agree. You have what you want. Leave me in peace. Catherine looked between Ophelia and Vincent, clearly calculating. The watching crowd was murmuring, some sympathetic to Ophelia, others clearly believing Catherine's performance. Finally, Catherine drew herself up with dignity. I can see you've made your choice, Ophelia. I tried to do right by you, but if you prefer to throw away your father's legacy and live as a servant, that's your decision. I wash my hands of you. She turned to the crowd, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. I tried truly, but some people can't be helped. She swept away, leaving a wake of confused whispers. Vincent squeezed Ophelia's hand. Are you all right? I think so. Ophelia's hands were shaking, adrenaline making her unsteady. Can we leave? Of course. They collected their coats and stepped into the cold night air. The wagon ride home was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. Finally, Vincent spoke. She's not going to leave you alone. She sees you as a threat now. What can I do? Ophelia asked wearily. She has all the power, all the resources. I'm just trying to survive. You're not alone, Vincent said firmly. Whatever she tries, Pa and I will stand with you. You're under our protection now. The words warmed Ophelia more than any fire. Why are you being so kind to me? You barely know me. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses through the darkness. When I found you at that gate, I thought you were dead. Seeing you there, so small and broken in the cold, something inside me just cracked wide open. Then you opened your eyes and looked at me, and I knew I'd do anything to protect you. I know it sounds crazy. We've only known each other a month, but I care about you, Ophelia, more than I probably should. Ophelia's breath caught. I care about you too, she admitted. It terrifies me because I've lost so much already. I don't know if I can survive losing more. Then we'll be careful, Vincent said. We'll take our time, but I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We'll figure this out together. At the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. They stood close in the darkness, breath misting in the cold air. Ophelia looked up at him, at his serious eyes and strong face, and made a decision. She rose on her toes and kissed him, gentle and brief, a promise rather than a demand. Vincent's arms came around her, holding her close, and he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll court you properly," he murmured, "the way you deserve, with time and respect and patience." "I'd like that," Ophelia whispered. Winter deepened, and with it, Ophelia's sense of belonging at the Dalton ranch. She and Vincent found quiet moments together, stolen conversations by the fire after Walter went to bed, or long rides on sunny afternoons when the work was done. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Vincent told her about losing his mother, about the loneliness of growing up without a woman's touch in the house. Ophelia told him about her mother's death, about her father's remarriage, about feeling displaced in her own home when Catherine arrived. "I should have fought harder," she said one afternoon as they rode through snow-dusted pines. "I should have challenged her, made her prove the marriage was legal something." "You were grieving and in shock," Vincent said gently. "You can't blame yourself for not being strategic when your world was falling apart. Still, I lost my home because I was weak." "You survived being thrown out to freeze to death. That's not weakness. That's strength." Vincent reached over and took her gloved hand. "You're the strongest woman I know, Ophelia Grace." Christmas came, and Ophelia threw herself into making it special. She baked and decorated, strung pine boughs through the house, and even found a small tree to set up in the parlor. On Christmas Eve, the three of them exchanged simple gifts. Walter gave Ophelia a beautiful shawl, warm and soft. Vincent gave her a pair of leather gloves perfectly fitted and a book of poetry she'd mentioned wanting to read. Ophelia had little to give, but she'd spent weeks secretly knitting scarves for both men, using yarn she'd unraveled from one of Sarah's old sweaters. They were simple gifts, but the men wore them with pride, and Walter hugged her with genuine affection. "You've made this house a home again," he said gruffly. "Thank you, Ophelia." That night, after Walter had gone to bed, Vincent and Ophelia sat by the fire, the house quiet and peaceful around them. Vincent had his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, content. "I've been thinking about the future," Vincent said quietly, "about what I want, where I'm going." "And what do you want?" Ophelia asked. "You," he said simply. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you. I want to marry you, Ophelia, if you'll have me." Ophelia's heart stuttered. It was too soon, her practical mind insisted. They'd only known each other 3 months, but her heart knew the truth. She loved him, loved. She'd probably loved him from the moment he'd caught her falling through that gate, his eyes full of fierce concern. "It's too soon," she said, testing the words. "Maybe," Vincent agreed, "but I know what I feel. I love you. I'll wait as long as you need me to wait, but I wanted you to know my intentions are serious." "I love you too," Ophelia admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I've been trying not to because it seems too fast, too improbable, but I do. I love you, Vincent Dalton." He kissed her then, deep and slow and thorough, and Ophelia melted into him, all her doubts and fears burning away in the heat of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Vincent said again. "Not today, not even next month, but soon. Say yes and make me the happiest man in Arizona." "Yes," Ophelia whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They set the wedding for spring, giving Ophelia time to adjust to the idea and to prepare properly. Walter was delighted, immediately welcoming Ophelia as a daughter rather than an employee. The small ranch hummed with excitement and planning, but Catherine wasn't done with Ophelia yet. In late January, a lawyer appeared at the Dalton ranch with papers. Catherine was suing Ophelia for theft, claiming she'd taken valuable jewelry and cash when she'd run away from the Grace ranch. The amounts listed were substantial, easily enough to land Ophelia in jail if proven. "It's a lie," Ophelia said, staring at the legal documents in horror. "I took nothing. She threw me out with the clothes on my back and nothing else." "We'll fight it," Walter said immediately. "I'll hire the best lawyer in Prescott. She's not getting away with this." The lawyer they hired, a sharp young man named Peter Morrison, was confident. The burden of proof is on her, he explained. She has to prove the items existed, prove they're missing, and prove you took them. Unless she has witnesses or evidence, it's just her word against yours. But Catherine had prepared well. She had a list of items supposedly missing: a diamond necklace, a ruby brooch, gold earrings, and $300 in cash. She had receipts showing she'd owned some of these items and a hired hand willing to testify he'd seen Ophelia with a bag when she left. "The bag had my clothes," Ophelia protested. "Nothing else." "Do you still have it?" Morrison asked. Ophelia's heart sank. "No. I left it at the gate that night. I was too cold to care about possessions." "Did anyone see the contents?" "Vincent and Walter saw me arrive, but I didn't have the bag by then. I dropped it somewhere on the road." Morrison sighed. "That makes it harder. It's still her word against yours, but she's building a narrative. The hysterical, resentful stepdaughter who stole from her grieving stepmother before running away." The trial was set for March. The intervening weeks were tense and miserable. Ophelia couldn't sleep, worry gnawing at her. If she was convicted, she'd go to jail. The wedding would be canceled. Her life, just starting to rebuild, would be destroyed again. Vincent was a rock, steady and supportive, and he never doubted her innocence, never wavered in his support. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he told her. "If the worst happens, I'll wait for you, however long it takes." "You can't waste your life waiting for a convicted thief," Ophelia said miserably. "You're not a thief, and I'm not wasting anything. I love you. That doesn't change based on what some corrupt judge decides." The trial was held in the Prescott Courthouse, a somber wooden building that smelled of old paper and anxiety. Catherine arrived dressed in elegant mourning clothes, looking every inch the respectable widow. Her lawyer was expensive and smooth, painting Ophelia as a resentful, unstable girl who'd never accepted her stepmother and had lashed out in grief and greed after her father's death. Ophelia sat beside Morrison, wearing her best dress, trying to look respectable and honest. Vincent and Walter sat directly behind her, a physical show of support that gave her courage. Catherine testified first, crying delicately as she described Ophelia's supposed theft. "I tried so hard to be a mother to her, but she never accepted me. After Thomas died, she became hysterical, screaming that the ranch should be hers. I tried to calm her, to help her, but she ran to her room and locked the door. When she finally came out, she had a bag and said terrible things. She said she'd take what was rightfully hers one way or another. Then she ran off into the night. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. The next morning, I discovered my jewelry box had been forced open and my valuables were gone." It was a compelling performance. The judge, an older man named Harrington, listened with a grave expression. The hired hand, a rough-looking man named Peters, testified he'd seen Ophelia with a bag and that she'd looked furtive and guilty. He claimed he'd tried to help her, but she'd run from him. Then it was the defense's turn. Morrison called Vincent to the stand first. "Tell the court how you found Miss Grace," Morrison instructed. Vincent's testimony was calm and factual. He described finding Ophelia collapsed at his gate, frozen and barely conscious, dressed only in a thin funeral dress and shawl, with no coat, no shoes, and no bag. He described her injuries, her state of hypothermia, the doctor's assessment that she'd nearly died. "Did she have any possessions with her?" Morrison asked. "Nothing. Just the clothes she wore, which were completely inadequate for the weather." "In your observation, did she appear to be someone who just committed theft and run away, or someone who'd been forced out to die?" "Objection," Catherine's lawyer called. "Speculation." "Sustained," Judge Harrington said. But the damage was done. The jury had heard Vincent's description, and the contrast with Catherine's story was stark. Walter testified next, corroborating Vincent's account, and adding that he'd ridden to the Grace Ranch the next morning and found Catherine suspiciously composed, not at all like a woman whose stepdaughter had just run off in dangerous conditions. Then Ophelia took the stand. She told her story simply, and honestly. Her father's death, Catherine's immediate hostility, the ultimatum to leave, the deliberate delay until after dark, the men who'd forced her off the property. She described the terror of that frozen night, the certainty she would die, the miracle of Vincent finding her. "Mrs. Winters claims you stole valuable jewelry and cash," Morrison said. "Did you?" "No, sir. I took nothing. I barely managed to leave with my life." "Why do you think Mrs. Winters is making these accusations?" Catherine's lawyer objected, but Judge Harrington allowed the question. "I think she wants to destroy any chance I have of challenging her ownership of my father's ranch," Ophelia said carefully. "If I'm a convicted thief, no one will listen to anything I say. She'll be safe in her theft of my inheritance." Objection. Inflammatory and speculative? Sustained. The jury will disregard that last statement. But again, the jury had heard it. When Ophelia stepped down, she saw several of them looking at Catherine with suspicion rather than sympathy. The closing arguments were passionate. Catherine's lawyer painted Ophelia as a liar and a thief, desperate to avoid consequences. Morrison painted Catherine as a calculating woman who'd married for money and was now eliminating any threat to her stolen fortune. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Ophelia gripped Vincent's hand so hard her knuckles went white. "We find the defendant not guilty," the foreman announced. Relief crashed through Ophelia so powerfully she nearly collapsed. Vincent caught her, holding her steady, and Walter whooped with joy behind them. Across the courtroom, Catherine's face was a mask of rage and disbelief. Judge Harrington banged his gavel. "Miss Grace, you're free to go." "Mrs. Winters, I'm troubled by the inconsistencies in your testimony and evidence. While you have not been charged with a crime, I strongly suggest you consider whether further legal action against Miss Grace is in your best interest. This court is adjourned." Outside, Ophelia breathed deeply of the cold March air, feeling like she'd been released from prison even though she'd never been locked up. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's really over." "Not quite," Morrison said, catching up with them. "Judge Harrington's warning was significant. He's basically saying he doesn't believe Mrs. Winters. If you wanted to challenge the inheritance, now would be the time. The court's sympathies are with you." Ophelia looked at Vincent, at Walter, at the lawyer waiting for her decision. She thought about her father's ranch, her childhood home, the land her mother was buried on. Then she thought about the Dalton place, the home she'd built there, the family she'd found. "No," she said finally. "I don't want the ranch. Catherine can have it. All I want is to move forward with my life and leave her behind." "Are you sure?" Vincent asked. "That ranch is valuable. You have every right to it." "I'm sure. Fighting her would mean months more of trials and stress and looking backward. I want to look forward. I want to marry you and build our life together. That's more valuable than any piece of land." Vincent kissed her forehead. "Then that's what we'll do." They married in April, when the high country was bursting with wildflowers and the aspens were just starting to green. It was a simple ceremony in Prescott's church, attended by neighboring ranchers and townspeople who'd come to respect Ophelia's quiet strength and grace. Walter gave her away with pride, and Vincent's vows were simple but heartfelt. "I promise to cherish you, protect you, and stand by you for all my days. You're my miracle, Ophelia. You walked out of the cold and into my life, and I'll spend forever being grateful for that gift." Ophelia's vows were equally simple. "I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you worth living. You saved me, Vincent, in every way a person can be saved. I'll spend my life proving I was worth saving." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. The reception was held at the Dalton Ranch, the house and barn decorated with flowers and ribbons. There was music and dancing and enough food for twice the number of guests. Catherine wasn't invited, and no one missed her. That night, in the room that had been Sarah's and was now theirs, Vincent and Ophelia consummated their marriage with tender passion. Ophelia had been nervous, innocent despite her 20 years, but Vincent was patient and gentle, making sure her first time was about pleasure rather than pain. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Ophelia felt complete, in a way she'd never experienced. "Happy?" Vincent murmured against her hair. "Beyond words," Ophelia said. "I love you so much." "I love you too, forever." They settled into married life with easy grace. Ophelia continued running the household, but now as mistress rather than employee. She and Vincent worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their passion deepening as they learned each other's bodies and hearts. Summer came hot and bright. The cattle prospered, the horses multiplied, and the ranch thrived under Walter and Vincent's management. Ophelia planted a larger garden and learned to make cheese and butter to sell in town. She was building something again, creating value and purpose, and it felt good. In July, Ophelia realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week, afraid to hope, then told Vincent one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Vincent's head whipped around, his eyes wide. "Truly?" "I'm late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings. I can't be certain yet, but I think so." Vincent let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We're going to have a baby. Pa, we're going to have a baby." Walter came running from the barn, and when he heard the news, he embraced them both with tears in his eyes. "A grandchild. Thomas would be so happy, Ophelia. So proud of you." The mention of her father made Ophelia's eyes sting, but they were happy tears. "I wish he could have met Vincent, could have known I was safe and loved." "He knows," Walter said firmly. "Wherever he is, he knows, and he's at peace." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ophelia bloomed with health, her body changing in fascinating ways. Vincent was attentive and protective, sometimes comically so, rushing to help her with the smallest tasks until she had to remind him she was pregnant, not broken. In late autumn, when the aspens turned gold and the air grew crisp, Ophelia went into labor. It was long and painful, but Vincent never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Ophelia wept with joy and relief. "He's beautiful," Vincent said in wonder, cradling the tiny infant with enormous care. "He looks like you." "He has your eyes," Ophelia said, exhausted but happy. They named him Thomas Vincent Dalton, honoring both his grandfather and his father. Walter held his grandson with shaking hands and tears streaming down his weathered face. "Welcome to the world, little Thomas. You're going to be so loved." Thomas was indeed loved, doted on by parents and grandfather alike. He was a happy baby, easy-tempered and curious, and he brought new joy to the ranch. Ophelia had never imagined being this happy, this content. Her life had been torn apart, but she'd built something new and better from the ruins. One afternoon the following spring, nearly 2 years after that terrible frozen night, Ophelia rode into Prescott for supplies. She was surprised to see a for sale sign on her father's ranch as she passed. Curious, she stopped at the land office. The clerk, a friendly man named Henderson, was happy to gossip. "Mrs. Winters? Oh, she ran through that inheritance faster than anyone thought possible. Spent money like water, hired fancy managers who didn't know cattle from chickens, made bad investments. Whole ranch is mortgaged to the hilt now. Banks foreclosing and selling it at auction next month." Ophelia absorbed this news with mixed feelings. Part of her felt vindicated, a bitter satisfaction that Catherine's greed had led to her downfall. But mostly she just felt sad. Sad for the waste and the loss and the destruction of what her father had built. She mentioned it to Vincent and Walter that evening. "I thought I should tell you, my father's ranch is being auctioned. If you wanted to expand, you could probably get it for a good price." Vincent and Walter exchanged glances. "What do you think?" Walter asked. "It's your father's land. How would you feel about us owning it?" Ophelia considered carefully. The idea of her father's ranch belonging to strangers hurt, but the idea of it belonging to Vincent and Walter, to Thomas's inheritance, felt right. I think Papa would want it to go to family, she said slowly. If you bought it, if we combined the ranches, it would be fitting. His legacy would continue, just in a different form. So the Daltons attended the auction and, after spirited bidding, secured the Grace Ranch at a fair price. Combining the properties gave them one of the largest spreads in the territory, nearly 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. Walter and Vincent threw themselves into restoring the neglected ranch, repairing fences and buildings, restocking cattle. Ophelia visited her father's grave for the first time since his burial, bringing wildflowers to lay on the headstone. She knelt in the grass, touching the carved letters of his name. "I'm happy, Papa," she whispered. "I know you wanted that for me. I married a good man, a strong man like you. We have a son, your grandson. The ranch is ours again in a way. Catherine lost everything she stole, and we're thriving. I hope wherever you are, you can rest easy knowing I'm all right." Vincent found her there, waiting quietly until she was ready. Together they walked back to their wagon, to their son sleeping in his basket, to their future stretching bright and promising ahead. Years passed, good years full of hard work and deeper love. Ophelia and Vincent had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son. The combined Dalton Grace Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for quality livestock and fair dealing. Walter lived to see all his grandchildren grow, passing peacefully in his sleep at 72, content and surrounded by family. Thomas grew into a strong young man with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. The younger children brought their own joys and challenges, filling the house with noise and laughter. Ophelia sometimes looked at her life and marveled at the journey from that frozen night to this warm abundance. She and Vincent grew old together, their love deepening and mellowing like good wine. They never forgot how they'd met, how close she'd come to dying, how much of their happiness was built on the foundation of that terrible night, and Vincent's compassionate response. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Ophelia to the gate where he'd found her. It had been rebuilt over the years, made stronger, but the place was the same. "I think about that night sometimes," Vincent said, his arm around her waist. "How different everything would be if I hadn't heard you, if I'd stayed inside, if I'd been 5 minutes later." "But you did hear me. You did come, and you saved me," Ophelia said. "Not just my life, Vincent. My heart, my future, everything. You gave me a reason to live, and then filled that life with love." "You saved me too," Vincent said. "I was going through the motions before you came, living but not really alive. You brought light and warmth and purpose. You made everything matter." They kissed there by the gate, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something bright from those ashes. The sun was setting, painting the high country in shades of gold and rose, and in the distance they could hear their children calling them to dinner. "Come on," Ophelia said, taking Vincent's hand. "Let's go home." They walked together up the drive to the house that glowed warm with lamplight and rang with family voices. It was a home built on kindness and courage, on love that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. Ophelia had lost her first home to cruelty and greed, but she'd found a better one she'd helped create, one that would stand long after she was gone. That night, lying in bed with Vincent's arms around her and the sounds of their sleeping children drifting through the house, Ophelia reflected on her journey. From that frozen girl collapsed at a stranger's gate to this woman, loved and secure and happy, was a transformation she could never have imagined in her darkest moment. But life, she'd learned, was full of unexpected miracles. Hers had come in the form of a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart, a man who'd seen a woman in need and offered not just help but love, not just shelter but home. She'd been locked out in the cold and left to die. Instead, she'd found a gate that opened onto everything she'd ever wanted. That was the story she'd tell her grandchildren someday, a story of how cruelty and kindness could both shape a life, but only love could define it. Ophelia fell asleep in her husband's arms, grateful for every moment of the life they'd built together, every challenge they'd overcome, every joy they'd shared. She'd walked through fire and ice to get here, but every step had been worth it. Every frozen moment of that terrible night had led her to this warm forever. Years later, when Ophelia was an old woman surrounded by children and grandchildren, someone asked her what the secret to a happy life was. She thought of that night, of the cold that had nearly killed her and the warmth that had saved her. She thought of Vincent's face in the lamplight, of his steady hands catching her as she fell, of the love that had grown from compassion and crisis into something unshakable. The secret, she said, is finding someone who opens the gate when others lock you out. It's choosing warmth over bitterness, love over fear, building over mourning. It's taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and letting it lead you to the best thing. That's how you survive. That's how you thrive. She looked around at her family, at the legacy she and Vincent had created together. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and a ranch that stretched across the high country like a promise kept. Thomas Grace would have been proud. Catherine Winters was long forgotten, her name a cautionary tale told to warn against greed and cruelty. But the Daltons endured. The combined ranch passed down through generations, the story of its founding becoming family legend. The gate where Vincent found Ophelia was preserved and marked, a reminder of where it all began, a testament to the power of compassion in a harsh world. Ophelia and Vincent lived into their 80s, dying within months of each other as old couples sometimes do, unable to bear separation after a lifetime together. They were buried side by side on the hill where Thomas Grace rested, where Ophelia's mother had been laid so many years before. The headstone was simple but perfect. Vincent and Ophelia Dalton, 2 hearts that found each other in the cold and kept each other warm forever. The ranch continued, prosperity built on the foundation of love and hard work they'd established. Their children married and had families of their own. The high country of Arizona changed as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, but the Dalton name remained, respected and enduring. And sometimes on cold November nights when the first frost came and the stars burned bright in the clear desert sky, ranch hands swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand up the drive, a man and a woman, forever returning home. Whether it was ghost or memory or simple imagination didn't matter. The story was what endured. A love story born from cruelty and courage, from a woman locked out in the cold, and a man who opened his gate and his heart. It was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth celebrating, because in the end, that's what stories do. They remind us that kindness matters, that love can flourish even in the harshest conditions, that the worst moments can lead to the best lives if we're brave enough to keep walking, keep hoping, keep opening gates instead of closing them. Ophelia Grace had walked out of the cold into Vincent Dalton's life, and together they'd built something that lasted, something that mattered. Something that proved love was always worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth everything. That was their legacy, written not just in land and livestock, but in children and grandchildren, and a story that would be told for generations. The night she nearly died in the cold, and the cowboy who saved her and loved her forever.